Right, so all of Israel's remaining living hostages have been released under the terms of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. But Netanyahu's deranged defense minister Israel Katz has posted on X that the greatest challenge after the exchanges would be the destruction of all of Hamas's tunnels in Gaza, and saying he had instructed the IDF to prepare and name-checking a future US supervised mechanism that would apparently allow them to do so. That's not a rumour or a leak, it's the Minister of Defence posting on social media an operational directive yet to come. This truce was sold as a humanitarian step towards hopefully permanent peace, though of course we all feared that Israel would break it at some point. Katz has all but announced that intention already, but are any of us really surprised? Right, so it took less than 3 days for Israel's government to puncture its own ceasefire, it seems. This morning, as the first Israeli hostages crossed the border under Red Cross escort, Defence Minister Israel Katz had already announced online that the country's greatest challenge, after all these exchanges had finished, would be the destruction of all of Hamas's tunnels in Gaza, having tweeted out that Israel's greatest challenge after the phase of returning the hostages will be the destruction of all of Hamas's terror tunnels in Gaza, directly by the IDF and through the international mechanism to be established under the leadership and supervision of the United States. This is the primary significance of implementing the agreed upon principle of demilitarizing Gaza and neutralizing Hamas of its weapons. I have instructed the IDF to prepare for carrying out this mission. So you've just declared to the world that you're going to start pounding Gaza again when you've got your hostages back then. That's the inference, right? The ceasefire, brokered by Washington under the revived Trump framework, forbids Israeli offensive operations inside Gaza. Katz's statement therefore wasn't commentary, it was an order that directly contradicted the agreement he was meant to be upholding, that Netanyahu has signed. The post is a confession of intent to break the truce, broadcast in real time, broadcast ahead of the releases even. Katz's phrasing was explicit military syntax. I have instructed is not political rhetoric. It's a record of chain of command directive. The ceasefire text limits Israeli forces to defensive posture along established corridors, yet tunnel destruction cannot be performed from those positions. Every technique for neutralizing subterranean networks, from explosive demolition to bore drilling to flooding, all require engineers and explosives placed inside Gaza. Washington has also already confirmed that no US troops are going to operate inside Gaza. That is what we're being told at the moment anyway, ruling out any internal mechanism capable of doing the work that Katz suggests. Therefore, Katz's statement, framed as coordination with allies, collapses under its own logic. It's an impossible mission whose real purpose is to justify the inevitable breach of the ceasefire. When Hamas rejects foreign troops on its territory, as they will certainly do, having not been agreed to, as they would never agree to, and Israel can then claim non-compliance and restart the genocide, and no doubt the mainstream media will carry that narrative as well. Israel calls this next phase demilitarization, but there should be no next phase except their own withdrawal. Not stripping away weapons to secure peace when that isn't even part of the current ceasefire plan anyway. That comes in phase 2. It's yet to be negotiated. In practice, it means the detonation of whatever Israel feels like destroying, that is even left standing under the pretext that tunnels run under them. Well, we've been here before, haven't we? The same euphemism has appeared in every prior Israeli operation, targeting Hamas infrastructures translated into bombing apartment blocks or schools and medical sites. By redefining mass destruction as technical maintenance, officials like Katz get to recast war crimes as engineering projects. His statement is bureaucratic cover for further assault. Issuing an unachievable instruction serves a political purpose, though, doesn't it? It sets up a self-fulfilling rationale for renewed hostilities. When the ceasefire fails, as it must under the terms he has declared, the government will claim that Hamas violated their demilitarization clause. It's not a hypothetical pattern. We've seen it play out before. It's how every prior truce has ended. Israel signs it, redefines it, and then blames someone else for it when it all goes south. Katz's post simply made that process public. They're so arrogant now, they don't even hide it. While international media speaks of prisoner releases, these are, of course, hostages too. Too many of them. Israel still hold about 9,000 Palestinians, roughly 3,500 of them without charge. So hostages, therefore, in which case? They never get called it, though. Hamas held 20 living Israeli hostages until this morning, out of an original 251. The disparity is not incidental, it's structural, but the media never speaks of Israeli hostages. It becomes unavoidable when you consider that Israel are to release some 2,000 individuals in exchange, though. Israel has used imprisonment as population management for decades now, and it has not been spoken about nothing anything close to the same light that Hamas's actions on the night of October 7th have been. Administrative detention allows indefinite holding based on secret evidence that they never produce, with even children being seized. By any ordinary definition, that is hostage taking by state authority, and it's gone on for years. The exchange ratio of 1 Israeli for 100 Palestinians exposes who truly operates as a detaining power here. But Israel's own actions disprove the claim that the war was ever about rescuing hostages. In December of 2023, Israeli soldiers killed 3 captives who emerged waving white flags, didn't they? We remember that one. Earlier investigations by Haaretz and other news outlets confirmed that the Hannibal Directive, authorising lethal fire to prevent capture, was invoked on the 7th of October as well. Israel's involvement in that night. Former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant has even admitted that himself. The doctrine accepts the possibility of Israel killing its own people to deny Hamas leverage to demand Israel release the hostages that they hold. Once that principle gets institutionalised, the notion of hostage rescue, or the story of it, just becomes another communications exercise. Katz's timing of planning new strikes before all captives were even returned proves that point. The hostages were simply the justification, never the constraint. Katz's declaration also keeps Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition alive. The Prime Minister's political survival depends, of course, on those 2 far-right partners of his, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. They both oppose any halt to this campaign. Ben-Gvir has demanded that Gaza be erased. Smotrich insists Israel must retain control for security. Netanyahu himself said back in August that Israel intends to take control of all of Gaza. He repeated this month that Hamas will be disarmed and Gaza demilitarized. Katz's order converts those political pledges into a military plan now. Ending the war would collapse the coalition. Continuing it keeps Netanyahu in office. Under international humanitarian law, preparations for renewed hostilities during a truce are themselves violations, just more to add to the very long list that Israel have already racked up. Katz's instruction, which is specific and public and forward-looking, very much meets that definition. It signals intent to recommence occupation by force. The law of occupation turns on effective control. Destroying tunnels throughout Gaza requires regaining that control. The Defence Minister's own words establish mens rea, therefore, intent in advance of the act. Katz's reference to an American-led international mechanism is also fictitious. US officials have ruled out any deployment inside Gaza, and we have to assume that's the truth at this point, don't we? But no multinational structure exists to execute or supervise tunnel demolition. It wraps unilateral Israeli decisions in the illusion of some sort of partnership with the West. The technique should be another familiar one to us by now. Label the aggression as cooperation, and Western capitals just nod along rather than contradict an ally in public, especially when that's Israel. In earlier wars, Israeli leaders hid behind the language of reaction, every strike portrayed as retaliation. Katz dispenses with that cover. His statement assumes a world that is too numb or complicit to object. When the former Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf said in response to Katz's tweet, amongst many others who have weighed in on it, that they don't even bother to hide it, he hit the nail on the head. They aren't even hiding the fact that they are defying the very agreement they signed up to, because they always get away with it. The United Nations urged that the hostage deal be used to move towards ending occupation. Instead, Israel's own defence minister plans its continuation and has already issued instruction accordingly. Meanwhile, Gaza remains in ruins. 2 million people displaced, most of its hospitals barely functional, no medical aid has thus far been allowed in 3 days in, so Israel are already breaching rules over aid. Its population surviving on minimal aid delivery still controlled by Israel's military. Katz's order means that even this fragile pause is going to end up being temporary. Since 2014, every major Israeli operation in Gaza has followed the same cycle. The 2014 truce ended with new assassinations. The 2021 pause led to further strikes within weeks. The 2023 humanitarian breaks were used for retargeting. The 2025 ceasefire differs only in honesty. This time, the next stage was declared before the current has even finished. It's barely begun even. What Israel calls peace is in reality just an intermission in hostilities. So behind the language of tunnels and mechanisms are civilians. 90% of Gaza's population has been displaced. Entire districts lack drinking water. Hospitals run at 10% capacity. If bombing resumes under the banner of demilitarization now, casualties will mount up again amongst a population already half-starved to death. Each hostage returning to Israel does so against the backdrop of thousands of Palestinians very much still imprisoned. The humanitarian arithmetic remains grotesquely one-sided, and people will rightly ask, you've got your hostages back, why are you still bombing Gaza when everything resumes again? Because getting the hostages back was the whole reason they went to begin with, wasn't it? So Katz's statement is not merely reckless, it's evidentiary. It documents intent before commission. So should the conflict reignite, prosecutors and investigators will not need leaks or whistleblowers this time. The Defence Minister's own tweets are going to suffice. He's supplied them with a timestamp, the directive and the scope. In the language of law, the confession already exists. The absence of consequence illustrates the deeper problem, though. International law that gets applied selectively. The same action by another state would trigger sanctions. In Israel's case, it just triggers excuses. Western governments translate every Israeli escalation into security. The result is a hierarchy of legality in which allies of power are always immune. And that impunity is what sustains this genocide far more effectively than weapons shipments do. A genuine ceasefire would need independent monitors, full Israeli withdrawal, lifting of the blockade, due process for detainees, investigation of war crimes, and reconstruction led by Palestinians. None of these conditions appear in Israeli planning. Instead, officials speak of control and demilitarization. Those terms signal permanence, not peace. The genocide's next phase has already been bureaucratically prepared. It's already been written. If Israel resumes attacks once hostages are home, every ally that justified the war on humanitarian grounds will own that decision. The claim that the campaign was about saving lives will collapse. Governments that defended every strike as tragic necessity will have to confront evidence that the next assault was very much pre-planned. Katz's order is a record those allies cannot disown. The sequence is very straightforward. Katz orders tunnel destruction. Tunnel destruction requires invasion. Invasion violates ceasefire. Therefore, the order equals breach. Netanyahu declares intent to control all Gaza. His coalition depends on war. Every previous truce has ended the same way. The inference of future violation is not speculation. It's pattern recognition based on repeated conduct. And once intent is declared publicly, responsibility transfers to the world that hears it. Katz's statement ends the possibility of claiming any ignorance. The next round of bombardment, if it comes, will not be a surprise but an act executed after open warning. So the moral question now belongs to the observers, not only the perpetrators. On paper, the truce remains in place. In practice, Israel's defence minister has already written its expiry notice. His order to the army cannot be fulfilled without breaking the agreement. The confession is public, the chain of command is traceable, the humanitarian stakes are undeniable. When the next strike begins, no one will be able to say they did not know. The ceasefire that was meant to prove Israel's restraint has instead proven its intent. Katz's statement is not an accident of language. It's the moment Israel admitted that peace was never the goal. What happens now will decide not only Gaza's fate, but whether the international system still recognises a difference between a truce and a trap. And will those defending Israel today still do so tomorrow when hostages are no longer the issue? Netanyahu himself has shown intent to get out of this ceasefire as well, though hasn't been as explicit as his defence minister has been. In his case, he doesn't have to, though. He's never signed a ceasefire yet in his career that he hasn't broken. To get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here is your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.